Vincent, Solander Gallery, Contemporary Art Australasia is a byline. I wanted to ask you about that word Australasia and what that says about what your practice here.
Well, I suppose it can be slightly misleading. I mean, obviously by my accent are Australian.
Well, yeah, we could spot that.
And so there is a lot of our artists that we represent, some of which are from Australia, but also from the Asia region. It really needs to encompass perhaps Australasia and Pacifica. I think the term is a little bit misleading.
But it extends a community though, doesn't it, about printmaking particularly, I think,
yes,
isn't it?
It does.
That is a very active conversation across these countries that people might not be aware of.
Yes, well, having studied printmaking in Melbourne and then coming to New Zealand, not really knowing much about the New Zealand art scene when I first arrived.
Okay.
It was interesting the number of parallels that were happening. I mean, both in art history, all the same milestones are being made, but a different name attached. And so I've been trying to catch up over the last, 12 years on the equivalence in that history, but also in the kind of issues that each contemporary artist is addressing, both in Australia, New Zealand, and really around the world. It's both about the subject, it's also about the role that printmaking plays in the broader kind of art world.
Well, there's a historical one there. The name Solander is connected to the print and the Solander box.
That's right,
yeah.
Yes.
And I think you've got a tour. I mean, people may think that just what you do is in the gallery, but you're actually actively touring quite major shows of particularly of printmakers, and you've got one in Australia?
We do have a show touring in Australia at the moment, and also in Sweden. So the gallery, we've been operating in this location for 11 years, and from very early on we've been very keen to take the gallery outside of the walls of the gallery for lots of reasons. One of them is that for us in the gallery every day, you need some new project to really build up momentum and new energy and, get excited.
Yes.
And these projects have been a way of achieving that. So, for example, a residency project on Marci Island, we took 25 printmakers to Queensland. We've typically in Wellington, everyone's familiar with those wet, windy days. One day, on a horrible day, a man strode in across the gallery floor, put out his hand and said, "I'm the ambassador from Sweden. Tell me why you're named after a Swede." 2 hours later, after a long conversation, we had the kernel for what was our next project, called Paradise Lost.
Right.
So it was coinciding with the 250th anniversary of Cook's first voyage to the Pacific.
Okay, yes.
Daniel Solander was a botanist employed by Banks on board the Endeavour.
Yes.
He was really the scientist on board, and he had trained under Linnaeus, so that whole new botanical classification kind of methodology.
Which works on paper, has such a strong...
That's right. So all of a sudden, when we chose the name Solander, it was really about Daniel Solander having developed the collection box, now called a Solander box. It's used in art galleries all around the world. The Swedish ambassador was picking up on the botanical kind of background of Solander and his pivotal role on that voyage.
Well, let me take you... you're a printmaker yourself.
Yes.
It's a passion. And look, we're looking here, we can see you represent painting, but Nuala Gregory here, but you've also got these artists that you represent here, which are quite diverse. And I think you've got 43 artists that you have as represented by the gallery. It's enormous. There's actually quite a community that you hold here.
There is, yes. I mean, probably about 25% would be international. The rest, New Zealand. I mean, originally we defined ourselves exclusively as a works on paper gallery.
Yes.
But the reality is that most artists work across mediums, and we wanted to be able to give ourselves the full range of experience for people who come into the gallery. So the name Solander Works on Paper shifted slightly to Solander Gallery. Hence, ceramics, painting, other three-dimensional work along with printmaking. And because of my background as a printmaker, it's still at the core of, I think, what the gallery does.
And it feels very important because, I dare I say it, printmaking does feel like it's in a bit of a slipstream in terms of contemporary art. Despite being beloved and despite there being this incredible range of artists, you do not see print shows or works on paper shows in our public galleries in the way you used to.
No, well, it's hard to define exactly why that is. I think printmaking as a medium is highly undervalued.
Yeah.
And at institutional levels, quite often as well.
Yes.
So, you know, when I grew up in Melbourne, the art school that I went to, the VCO, was right behind the National Gallery Victoria. Most shows that featured there would always include printmaking elements in shows. It was, you know, standing alongside painting, you know, quite well. In New Zealand, it's less about that. You often see feature exhibitions at, you know, at Te Papa or wherever that are all about those high-profile artists. Works on paper really often get ignored.
Yeah.
I think for the printmaking artists that we represent, and certainly in my experience, there is the choice of being a printmaker is not because of the ability to do multiples of that image. There is something about the process of printmaking. There's something about ink on paper that gets under your skin and becomes a passion. There is, I think, something inherent in printmaking because many of the techniques are quite restrictive and tightly defined. And within that restriction, there's a possibility for enormous creativity. But you have to really be inventive about how you work within the constraints of many of the printmaking kind of techniques. And so that's what we look for in our artists who are able to work both within the kind of the cultural, historical context of printmaking, but are also prepared to kind of push into the future. I mean, people like Alexis Neal, for example, a Amery artist just north of Auckland, combining traditional weaving with contemporary printmaking techniques. You know, it's a way of bridging both history and the future. And in many of our artists are able to achieve that. Even Marci, you know, on the wall, you know, her explosive use of colour. Most people who come into the gallery just enjoy that explosion of colour. But once you start to unpick that, you realise how much time, effort and research goes in for that little bit of spontaneity on the wall. You know, it looks like it's floated out of heaven, but in actual fact, it's grown out of, you know, hard graft and sweat, and that's what I like about printmaking. You get lost in the beauty of the work, and once you understand a little bit about the techniques, your kind of brain explodes about, wow, you know. So that's, you know, you can tell that I'm a printmaker.
You can tell there's enthusiasm here for works on paper, folks. Thank you for all the hard graft you do on behalf of our artists. It's an incredible work here that you guys have done and at Solander and continue to do. It's wonderful. So thank you so much.
It's our pleasure, absolutely.
Marci, I know you're a printmaking tutor at the Learning Connection, but a little bit like Vincent, the accent might suggest that you have come originally from elsewhere. How did you come to Wellington?
I came from the US. I grew up in Colorado.
Yeah.
And my partner and I spent time working in Antarctica.
Oh,
and
really?
we always came through New Zealand on our way to and from, so
wow.
We loved it here.
It was he working there? Or?
Yeah, we both.
Are you both working there?
Yep.
Printmaking?
No. No, I was baking bread, actually. Yeah.
Wow. And so printmaking is clearly, I know your BFA was in printmaking, it's clearly been a real passion for you. What is it about works on paper and the print that kind of has kept you going for so long?
I think it's just the endless possibilities, really.
Yeah.
Because within printmaking is such a vague term.
Yeah.
It can be.
Wide, isn't
yeah,
it?
it's massive. So. So I started in one area, and then I sort of developed that, and then I have little side projects in different techniques in printmaking.
Okay.
And so for me, I'm kind of like this. I build in concentric circles of complexity, kind of. So I don't just pick a project or a style and just go forward like that. I'd like to just expand.
Right.
And so printmaking offers me great scope.
And I guess when you're teaching, you're also trying to expand people's understanding of what they can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are these works here that we're seeing in the gallery? What sort of works are these then in terms of prints? What's the technique?
The technique is collagraph. It's carborundum collagraph, I think is what I'd call it.
Can you unpack that for a little bit for us?
Yeah. In fact, I did bring some plates if you're interested in seeing them.
Okay. We could take some shots of that in a second.
So this plate in particular has, I think, six different plates as part of it. So you have perspex.
Right.
And I use floor polish and grit. So the carborundum is a grit. I paint it on the plate, and then the ink is applied and then polished off the surface of the plate and then printed.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah.
They're very colourful. In terms of the play with form, I think it seems that you're working a lot with visual perception, or it seems to me that it's interesting you talk about Antarctica because I always think of science, but there's a lot of play with visual perception in the work. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think that's my main reason that I make art. It's just that perception and vision, and trying to play with constraints.
Right.
But change things in order to get different things happening when you look at the work.
So it's a constant kind of fluid exchange in terms of what you can do. I mean, when do you know is a work successful?
Well, I guess when I fall in love with it, it's successful. I usually know it's finished after I've gone one step too far.
Okay.
You know? So.
Well, they're very beautiful. They're very full and lovable. Solander, you've been exhibiting here for quite a few years. What does it mean to have a gallery like this supporting you?
It's amazing because I get opportunities to show my work in a beautiful space.
Yeah.
And Vincent and Paulette do an amazing job of speaking to people about my work, whether a show is on or whether they're pulling works out of the archive and speaking to people about my work. They're quite passionate and encouraging to me.
Yeah.
They're, it's
and
really
and I guess it's a community of artists, right, who all share some similar language and knowledge?
Yeah, definitely. Printmakers, they are special sorts of people. Yeah. So I know many of the artists that are in the gallery, and it's good.
So it's a community as much as some kind of shop.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.